There are many stories that we could tell as we go back over 20 years, but one of the things Quint reminded me of recently was how life comes full circle sometimes. And when I was leading HR at Studer Group and we were doing recruiting, and Quint suggested we go to a search firm, it hurt my feelings. And I thought we could do it better. I was young and naive. And he said, no, no, sometimes you have to step aside and let the professionals do their job. So Quint, life has a funny way of working itself out. Welcome. Thank you. And we'll go ahead and dive right in and get started if that's okay with you.
Now, let me go in the search for a conversation,
Okay.
because it's pretty interesting, because
Okay.
I think what it does is, besides allowing people to do this for a living full time to really, I think, enlarge the pipeline because they've got it. I think another vital thing, it doesn't distract your people from doing what they're doing. I own a minor league baseball team, and we're doing a search right now for a president in Beloit, Wisconsin. And again, I said, let's use a search firm. And the person in baseball said, I think we can do this. I said, the distraction. And we had over 200 resumes come in right off the bat. Now, how long would it take an HR to do that? And so I'm a big believer that you don't want to distract your day-to-day people from their operations. So I'm a big believer in utilizing search firms.
Yeah, you convinced me. So here we are. So tell me, we live in Pensacola, and you and your wonderful wife Rishi have been really out front in thanking the frontline healthcare workers. We're going to dive right into what's going on today. You guys are running some great commercials. They're really amazing, and I know the respect and admiration you have for the front lines. Tell us what you've been up to recently, because some folks may not be aware, other than all the things you've been doing in the community. Tell us what's been happening in your world.
Well, the way to stay busy is don't charge. That's what I've learned. Yeah, how you do all these things with universities. And the other day, a CO called me and said, Quint, my leaders need some motivation. I could make it a Zoom call. Would you please do a Zoom call for my leadership team? And I said, well, let's talk money. And I could see there was a pause. And I said, you can't pay me. And he said, this is the best negotiations I've had in a long, long time. I think when we look at healthcare, I've been very fortunate because, while I left Huron in 2016, the first 2 years were brutal. It was like I had no idea how much I would miss the calling of healthcare. And that's what healthcare people are. They have a calling. They have a calling. Most, when I do seminars and talk to clinicians, the guys, they were a nurse at Halloween. They were running around with the doctor's kit. People in healthcare sort of knew they were going to get in it. And then aren't clinicians the same thing? I have so much respect for security guards and housekeepers and facilities and engineering and finance and human resources, because they could work anywhere. So I always loved calling in. And I think when I left Huron, those first 2 years were really tough. But luckily, I've got this not-for-profit here called Studer Community Institute. And we've really thrown ourselves into, really, when I look at the three circles, are growing intellectual capital. And the first one I got into through my relationship with Dana Suskin, a doctor at the University of Chicago, was brain development, that 85% of the brain is developed by age 3. So we've been piloting here in Escambia County for 3 years now. We're 13,000 mothers we've touched. And before a mom leaves the hospital, she gets a tutorial on how to build the brain and then gets a resource kit. What's really neat now is we have peer-reviewed research from the University of Chicago that shows we're turning the dial, because kindergarten readiness is the long-term economic indicator for a city, for a state, or for a country. So it's really neat. So one of the things I really want to do is take this throughout the country. I just recently did a seminar for modern healthcare because it's very inexpensive to do because you already have the staff. The other thing I've been doing, small businesses, is really skill building. We have 900 businesses that use the Studer Community Institute on a number of ways that you can grow your own skill set, thus grow your company. And the third thing that I got involved in was civic engagement. How do we get a community educated so they're understanding how to move forward? I've been doing that with the Pensacola News Journal. And so really we're trying to raise the IQ of, one, babies, IQs of business people, and then IQs of people in the community. And the other thing, and I've been really lucky, is it's probably my third year. Mark Clement of TriHealth must have known that I was dying on the vine, not being in healthcare. And he invited me to be on the board of TriHealth and Bethesda, which is another part of TriHealth. And that's been just marvelous, being engaged again on what's going on and so on. As you know, I've always been very connected to the recovery community due to my own recovery. And so I was lucky enough to beg Mark Mishik, the CEO of Hazelden, to put me on his board. So I've been on the board of Betty Ford and Hazelden Betty Ford. And then the other point is I love education. You know, I was a teacher and I was very involved in AUPHA, which helps faculty members in healthcare administration. And I'm still very active. I bet you once a week, I'm a guest lecturer in a university on Zoom, again, with those tough financial conditions I lay out. And then I'm on the board of CAMI, which I love because they really look at the accreditation of programs in healthcare administration. So I've been really fortunate to sort of branch out, but then branch back in to healthcare and stay connected. But also I've learned so much these last 5 years not being in day-to-day operations, which have been because you have to hone your skills. So I'm really fortunate, and you know, I'm one of the lucky ones.
Quint, you wrote a book back in 2015 called Healing Physician Burnout. Prior to COVID-19, burnout was rampant in healthcare. And now I know you've been doing a lot and you shared with me around stress and trauma. Talk a little bit about strategies to combat burnout, what you see as the implications of what we're currently going through for healthcare workers.
About 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, in fact, more than 6 years ago, my sister was dying of cancer. I happen to remember, I'll never forget, I got a phone call while I was at Moffitt Cancer Center from George Ford, a physician in Texas, who said, Quint, you have a good influence in healthcare, and somebody's got to come out about physician burnout. And much of the work in the book was George's research. And then we looked at how do you create the right culture? Because, you know, I like resiliency and I like meditation, but why don't we create better cultures so you're not just dependent on resiliency and meditation to get you through these tough times? I think the challenge with that book was a little bit ahead of its time. And of course, that's when I then left Huron, so I didn't have a chance to really promote the book as much as I would like. Now, fast forward now, when you have the pandemic, there's some similarities and some differences. And I've really had my eyes opened up through this. Number one was being on the board of the two boards I'm on. Just think of that. I'm on a board of a behavioral medicine center, which is going to understand what's the impact of the pandemic firsthand. Then I'm on the board of a large healthcare system, so I've seen it from both ends. And on the board of TriHealth, I was really impressed with what they've done with stress and resiliency, a resource toolkit they created. I was really loved it. And then Diana Hendel and Mark Goldstein asked me to write a foreword for their book, Why Hope When You Can Heal? And it talks about Diane's experience when she was the president of a Long Beach Medical Center when there was a shooting in her hospital, or an employee shot his boss and his boss's boss, and what she went through. And as I was reading, the light bulb went on, is maybe we should be treating trauma too, because I think we don't want to use that word trauma. It's like trauma. We'd love to keep people from going into trauma, of course. But if you look at it, and I've created something called the organizational scale, where people can go and say on a 1 through 10, like the pain scale, where's my organization at? I just did that, in fact, with a large healthcare system. And, you know, where am I at? 1 is well-being, 10 is trauma. Well, then what? And I don't, when people are in the hospital, you ask them to do the pain threshold. You don't do a big education thing on pain. You trust their subjective point of view. And it's been really incredible to watch, because when I was writing the foreword for the book, I started reading the definition of trauma. Now stress, you know, we all know stress is more short term. Doesn't have to be totally negative. I'm a little stressful before even this conversation, but when it's over, I'll be done. I'll be not as stressed. But you know, it causes some short-term issues. But if we let it linger, it starts causing more permanent damage. But stress, we can learn how to handle stress a little bit easier. Trauma is a little bit different. Trauma is when we start feeling hopeless, when we don't think there's an end in sight. Sometimes our roles change. So if you look at what's happening in healthcare, I'm a physician, And all of a sudden I'm dealing with COVID and I'm now doing telemedicine. I haven't done telemedicine before. I'm in a healthcare system and all of a sudden we can't do elective surgeries. But so some people aren't working hardly at all. And other people are working six. I talked to a hospital the other day. Somebody's worked 25 straight days in the hospital because of COVID, what's going on. So I looked at this and I created a presentation. Are we treating stress or trauma? And I think it's pretty neat. And then I'm lucky enough, my Busy Leaders Handbook was read by Cy-Fair Fire Department, and we've been working with them on their culture. And firefighters, I don't know if you're aware of this, I wasn't, they have a self-assessment tool because they're dealing with so much stress and trauma. They literally have a self-assessment tool that sort of says, am I thriving? Am I starting to be in stress? Am I in heavy stress or am I in trauma? So we've been sort of providing that to employees to say, we can assess the organization and then we can assess ourselves. And I think that's really vital because if we don't get the assessment right, we don't get the treatment right. And I think we've sort of been treating everything as stress when I think we should be treating some things as trauma. So we also found a framework for treating trauma, which is pretty cool. And what happens is if somebody's feeling this way, then you bring them back to purpose. If somebody's showing these signs, then you look at the structure that they're working in. So I think I've gotten pretty sophisticated, not only in how to assess it, but how to treat it. And then we also offer, Shannon, a toolkit. Due to my work with AUPHA and TriHealth and my own companies, we've literally created a toolkit that you can give to employees. And we're very fortunate because TriHealth lets us put stuff they've developed. We put stuff we've developed, and there's no charge. And we give that to an organization and they put their name on it. They of course give TriHealth credit for what they've provided and so on. And then they give that to all their employees. So we're really excited because AUPHA gave that to 69 universities in the United States of America, have now given our toolkit to faculty members who are going through a lot of change. And any of your listeners want to, Quint at quintstuder.com, we will send them the toolkit and they can utilize it in any way they want. We just want to help people through these tough times.
But you know what your mentorship has meant to me and so many others. Personally, I haven't made many major decisions in the last 20 years that you weren't consulted on, including who I might marry. You introduced me to my husband a long time ago, and the rest they say is history. But you touched me with an article that you recently wrote about the importance of mentorship for our local paper. One of your mentors recently passed away. Talk a little bit about the importance of having a mentor and being a mentor.
Ironically, I think my first touch of mentorship, and I didn't even understand it, of course, when I first got into education. But probably the biggest one is in a recovery community, you usually have somebody that's sort of a mentor, they call a sponsor. And all of a sudden you learn to trust, you learn to be vulnerable, you learn to be authentic. And then you learn how helpful it is. I remember Norm Adams, one of my people that I count on, he's deceased now. And I would say, Norm, I just want to thank you so much. And he'd say, the one thing you and I will never agreed on is who should be thanking who. So I remember that. And when I became president of Baptist Hospital, Inc., there was a small vet hospital in Gulf Breeze, Florida that was part of Baptist Hospital, Inc. And the person there was named Dick Fulford. And Dick had been the lead there since it opened. He was older than me, probably by 15 years or so. And so that was one of the hospitals. Now, when I looked at their results, they were so good. My whole goal was not to mess up with them. But, you can learn. Sometimes when people think of mentor, they think of somebody that maybe reports to you. Well, Dick became a mentor and he reported, that you report to, but it was the opposite. So what I wrote about with Dick is his unbelievable role modeling of excellence. This guy, and he didn't act like, well, this doesn't count. If you went to Gulf Breeze Hospital and then you went to Disney, you'd say, Disney should really learn a few things from Gulf Breeze Hospital in the area of landscaping. Because he mentioned that everything was excellent. One of my favorite stories is he always did new employee orientation. He missed one because he was on vacation. And Dick was a big guy and distinguished looking, and he always dressed very well. And one day, a new nurse was walking with some other nurses, had been there a while, and there was a piece of paper on the floor. And she picked it up, and all of a sudden she heard this loud clapping down the hallway. And she looked, she couldn't tell who it was, but she saw this sort of figure of a man because the sun was shining. And she said to somebody, "Who is that?" And they said, "That's Mr. Fulford, the administrator of the hospital." And she said, "Whoa, picking up paper must be really important around here." Dick understood clarity, reward, and recognition. He was unbelievably great at reward and recognition. And the thing in the note in the article I wrote, the column I wrote was, we had a bad month at Baptist. I was really questioning, are we really going to make it here? You know, I came here to help, and is my career hitting the end point here? And I have a challenge with sometimes wearing my emotions on my sleeves. So we had a senior executive meeting, and Dick is there because he's the president or administrator of Gulf Breeze Hospital. And I'm sort of living in self-pity, whining, complaining in front of people that report to me, certainly not giving them confidence. And all of a sudden, Dick said, "Can I talk to you a minute?" Went out in the hallway, and this is where the roles changed. He just looked at me and said, "You cannot do this. These people need encouragement. They need support. They need positive. You've got to go back in there and you've got to change." And I did. And I thought that took great courage. A fellow that reports to me to tell me I have spinach in my teeth. And, you know, that's one of my favorite sayings. When you love somebody, you tell them they have spinach in your teeth. And so I picked up from Beth Keene, who worked for us years ago and, of course, passed away of breast cancer. So I think mentorship is really vital. And because I think I was talking to somebody today, Ben St. Peter, who goes to Marquette University, and he called me about career. And I said, when you look at career, the thing you're looking for the most is somebody that wants to develop you. And I believe if you're a leader or a manager today, you're a chief development officer. Your job is to maximize the human potential of people that work for you. And we can fall into the trap because, you know, when I first started in healthcare, we didn't have an organizational development department. We didn't have leadership development. We didn't have a chief experience officer. And these are all valuable people. But that doesn't mean as a manager, I can advocate development to other people. They can be helpful. So I'm just a huge believer that our goal is to help other people. My grandson, Cooper Kennedy, goes to the University of St. Thomas, and he's got an assignment to interview someone. So he interviewed me today. And the question is, what's the main role of a manager? And I said, certainly it's achieve the desired outcomes, but you only do that by truly developing the people around you to maximize their human potential.
That's great. So you're really dressed up for Cooper today, right?
No, for Kingsley.
Well, so Quint, back to kind of healthcare and where we are and any predictions in terms of, you know, it's been a tough 9 months, tough year. Any predictions for 2021 and beyond as it relates to healthcare? You're known for being able to see around corners. So what do you think in terms of where we go from here and what life looks like when we come out of this thing?
Well, I'm going to give a few very specific tips, and one of them is communication. And I want to bring up something that might seem a little uncomfortable for people, but I've heard enough executives speak, and I've spoken to enough group to say you've got to be really sensitive about the words you use right now. You know, we used to hear words. You'll hear people say, "Don't let any crisis go by without, you know, doing something." Or, "Gee, there's some positive that has come out." I've heard people say, you know, even though this is bad, there's some positives that come out of it. You just can't say that. The human beings that work in healthcare in this country can't find a positive because you have too many people dying. You have too many businesses going broke. You have too many people living in fear. So I understand that we're going to pivot and find some things that are going to be useful to us in the future that we might not have found out about. I'm just sort of helping people understand to be real careful, particularly executives, because no one's going to say to them, "Don't use that word." But I've heard executives say, you know, "Don't let a crisis go without doing whatever that word is," or, you know, even some positive things have come out of this. And I'm not disagreeing with that. It's just how you message it and how you word it. So I think some of the things we're going to see if If COVID is a earthquake, just remember with every earthquake, you think it's over and there's the aftershock. So what we need to be prepared for is the aftershock. So what is the aftershock? The aftershock is we've got a lot of really tired, worn out people that even though they can be exhilarated about the vaccine and they see a light at the end of the tunnel, there's going to be an aftershock. And if you look at healthcare workers, this is why my stress and trauma work I think is so vital. They are some of the greatest people in the world on taking care of others and some of the worst people in the world on taking care of themselves. Anyone in healthcare can go into the human resource department and pull up medications and find out what are the largest medications that are being used by your workforce without individual people. And you're going to find antidepressants are either 1, 2, or 3 in utilization. Now, I'm a believer that you treat depression, and antidepressants can be very helpful and necessary, but that's not the only thing you can do. The other thing you ask is, how many people are utilizing the EAP? Now, if you had a situation where a half your workforce might have breast cancer, you would get a mammogram for everyone. Well, we're in a situation where probably a predominant amount of our workers have gone through an unbelievable stressful period. My daughter-in-law, Danelle, is a nurse at Beloit Memorial Hospital in Beloit. She's been working 6 days a week, like since March, 12 hours a day, and she feels guilty if she's not at work, and she feels guilty if she's not at home with her 2 boys who are in virtual education at times. So I think one of the aftershocks is not thinking just because maybe we have a vaccine or COVID's going to go down eventually, that we don't have a lot of work to do. And that work to do is recapturing, if we've lost some, the hearts of our employees. I got a call from a CEO not too long ago, and he was just exhausted, so sad, because they had just done an employee engagement survey, and all the emotional bank account he had built had been lost. Now, I think every healthcare executive has worked extremely hard in communication, extremely hard in doing all they can. But even if you do everything you can, we have hurricanes here. We can do all we can. But when the hurricane hits, it still causes damage, even if we recover quickly. So I think one of those areas is just really looking back and retrenching into the purpose, the mission, and the health of the employees. That's why we utilize that self-assessment tool and the pain threshold tool, because address it. The worst thing you can do is not talk about trauma. And what we do is we do a lot of teaching on resiliency, but do we teach enough on self-assessment? Do we teach enough on resources? Do we get rid of the stigma that getting help is something wrong? Next, I think we've got to really maximize some of the things we have pivoted with and utilize those. We have pivoted an awful lot to be able to be people work virtually. And we need to look at, do we keep some of that flexibility? Because people really appreciate flexibility. Some of us have backed off in leadership training because we just haven't had time. So is it time to beef back up on all our training and development in the workforce? Because, I will just tell you that I was booked to speak at a place and they keep pushing it off a month after a month after a month because of COVID. I get that, but now they've got to catch up for it. I think the use of telemedicine and telehealth is really vital. And I think, to give you an example, a good friend of mine's wife's got rheumatoid arthritis. And during COVID, she didn't get to go in to see her doctor, and she did it virtually. When she got off, she turned to her husband and said, I'll never go see my doctor again. Physically, I'll keep doing this. They liked it really, really much. So I think also looking at the ability to take the pivots we had to take. And probably the fourth thing is community. If you look at hospitals and health systems years and years ago, they were community stalwarts. They were so engaged in the community. And I think because healthcare's got big corporate headquarters, at one time, every hospital was their own hospital, consolidation, all good things, but even the good things have an unintended consequence. And some of the unintended consequence, if I'm a CEO and I'm only here 3 years and I'm going somewhere else, I think though we've been involved in the communities, I think the hospitals and health systems are so much more involved in the community now because of COVID. They become the educator. They become the people that do the vaccines. They've become the person you go to for health. But a lot of it is also prevention. I mean, think about it. The stance that healthcare is taking right now on prevention with wear a mask. I don't call it socially distancing. I call it physically distancing. Wash your hands. So I think healthcare has now reset themselves as the community leader in population health. Because I've always sort of joked, when we say population health, it usually means population health regarding the insurance product that we're part of. It's not population health for people that I might never see in my hospital. It might not be population health for people that might show up in another hospital. And probably so I really think the community connection, and probably there's a fifth one, it's collaboration between hospitals and health systems that thought they were sort of competitors. I just look at TriHealth in Cincinnati. And Cincinnati, all the providers have gotten together to collaborate. They meet weekly about what's going on. They talk about PPE equipment. They talk about vaccines. They talk about who's got beds. They're flexible with staff. They're willing to let staff go work other places if they need be. So this pandemic has caused collaboration between organizations in the same community. And you know what? Community people get excited about collaboration. They do not get excited about competition. So those are some of the 5 aftershock focuses I would have.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. And you and Rishi just made a really generous donation to 2 of the local hospitals in our community who are working together. And you say, you didn't give to one, you didn't give to the other. You said, this is for both of you, and figure it out and work together of how we get our community back on track, right? So
I'll tell you a story about that. We gave $1 million and we split it between 2 hospitals. And when we gave it, each hospital had their own press release ready to go. And we told them, no, we're going to set out a collaborative press release because people want to see hospitals together, working together, not separate. And I have often talked, I have a new book coming out called The Calling this spring about people in healthcare have a calling. Their DNA calls them to it. And I talk about the fact that, employees don't get turned on by the hospital war room or the competitive or market share. I mean, when I was president of a hospital, and the other person was president of a hospital, while we're beating our chest and acting like we're competing, the pharmacist at my one hospital is bringing medications over to the other hospital because they needed them for patients. And I think we can take this pandemic and get back to why we all exist in healthcare. It's to truly provide healing services, no matter where they get it. And I think that's really the key.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's great. So Quint, we are nearing the end of our time, but I'd invite you, anything that I didn't ask you that you think would be helpful to leaders in healthcare today. I mean, you gave those 5 excellent points. Any closing thoughts or comments as we near the end of our time?
Yes. As you know, I'm my wife jokes, I've never met a mental health counselor I didn't want to go see, a couch I didn't want to lay on for a while. So when I go through therapy, one of the things a therapist told me one time, early on, 30 something years ago, she said, when I tell you something positive about yourself, you deflect it. When I tell you something negative, you let it in. And she said, I think the reason you feel so bad about yourself is you filter out the positives. I think that filter has gone into every healthcare provider in the country. And I think we filter out the positives. We take home where we failed, where we've missed. I always tell people, you want a challenge, try to compliment a healthcare worker. They fight with you. You're doing a good job. I could do better. It's like, oh, everybody's doing it. And I think people need to be kinder to themselves. If it takes 3 compliments to 1 criticism for another human being to feel good about you, well, you have to give yourself 3 to 1. My therapist has me have a little picture in my closet of me as a kid. And I gotta sometimes talk to me like a father would talk to you, like, you're okay. I love you. We're going to make it through this. My main message to healthcare workers, and it has been that for 2 decades now, is be kind to yourself. You work too hard. You do too much good work to beat on yourself. Healthcare is tough enough. We got enough stuff beating on us, all the time. We got enough pressure. not to give self-imposed pressure. So my message is to be kind to yourself because you deserve it, because you work really hard and you make a difference and you save lives. The other thing I think that's happened, particularly with the vaccine, I think we've gained tremendous confidence back. All of a sudden
Mhm.
in healthcare, this whole idea for it was sort of negative and the cost. I think we've regained the confidence and the love from the country on what healthcare workers do with the vaccine, with the hard work. It's when we did our ads that we've been running, it was really heartfelt to thank these people. And so I think the country's fallen in love with healthcare as they always should be.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you see the sentiments from everywhere, but these people have been doing the same thing for as long as we've had hospitals and health systems, but it's the recognition is certainly well deserved. So thank you again, Quint.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon and
My
take
pleasure.
care. Okay. Bye-bye.